Hello, everyone. Good to be with you today. In this short video, we have the privilege of being in conversation with Dr. Anahi Morales Hudon. Anahi is a professor in the School of Social Innovation here at St. Paul's, and she holds a PhD in sociology from McGill and specializes in social movements and intersectionality. So the readings for this week focus on qualitative research methods. Anahi has previous experience with these methods in international contexts. So I've invited her to share some of her thoughts on her own research experience, including how she perceives the challenges and benefits of conducting research using qualitative methods. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Lauren.
I wanted to start with a question related to your own research experience. So if you could say a bit about your experience with qualitative methods and if you use these methods as part of a particular research project, that would be great.
Okay, so I started using qualitative methods in my MA research a little before for specific projects for community organizations who wanted to have portraits of women's organizing in Quebec. So I did a little bit there, but mostly in my MA and PhD. The reason I chose qualitative methods from the beginning is because of the research questions I had. So as you mentioned, I'm interested in social movements. In social movements, you have both methods, quantitative, qualitative, mixed, but some of the research in social movements invites more for qualitative methods when you're interested in the dynamics of movements, in how actors, so in their specific trajectories, how and why they decide to get involved, what's the process of that, and how they feel they influence the dynamics of movements. And my master thesis was about the question of indigenous women's organizing in Mexico with a movement that rose in '94, and it was very important, the worldwide attention to the movement. And one of the first leftist movements that had the presence of women in every level of decision making, which is not always the case. And I was interested in that. And for that, I felt I needed to interview the women who were involved to understand why they were involved, the challenges they faced. So I started using qualitative methods, mostly interviews, semi-structured interviews for the master thesis. A little bit of observation, that was the aim, but I didn't really get to that much, mostly interviews. And then when I decided to continue my research in the PhD, I was interested in the same region, so in Mexico again, but more at the subnational level, and a comparative study, so a multiple case study. Qualitative too, and I was interested to understand how and why indigenous women's movement in Mexico developed differently from one region to the other after the major influence of that first indigenous women's movement of '94. And for that, I had to do a lot of observations this time before doing the interviews to gain access and to better understand who had influence in the movement, who were the groups that were active in the movement, and then choose with whom I needed to do interviews. And then with contacts, like snowball methods. So that's mostly my experience with qualitative methods. So I can explain more if you want, but that's in these two research projects.
So you were saying a little bit about observation. Could you say a little bit more how you used observation in either of your projects?
So I will maybe take the PhD, which I did 1 year of field work. So I have more examples for that one. As it happens with qualitative methods, I have my plan. Everything was planned, like step 1, I will do interviews. Step 2, I will participate to activities. That didn't turn out to be the case, so I needed to rearrange and adjust things, and I think it's often the case with qualitative methods. So I realized that because a lot of people had been interested in the past in that topic, but not from the same perspective, some groups were resistant to give interviews. So it appeared to me that it was very important to participate and get engaged a little bit more.
So you could build trust and rapport with your potential interviewees.
Yeah, you're right. So I started to participate to events they organized.
Okay.
And that involved sometimes not participating only in the regions I was interested to interview people, but at the national level, international events.
Okay.
So then I started to just follow up the activities of different groups and to participate and to be very transparent, though, about my role. So I'm here because I'm doing a research. That's the interest I have. That's the research question I have. And I use those moments to validate. So do people think that research question was interesting or not? Also to think about, would this contribute positively to understand better something and then change things? Or so I started to meet with people that way, participating. And one day at one of these international conferences for Indigenous women, we were sitting around with some friends I had met in the process, researchers too, or just participants living in the area I was living, because I had the chance that my family were living in one of the states where I conducted the research, the state where I also grew up. And I had a connection and knowledge of the region too. So I was with one friend from the same region. We had traveled to Mexico City and we were sitting and chatting with other people who participated in the event. And then some of the key national leaders just joined us because we were like having conversation. And they sat down and then they asked why we were there. And suddenly it became like the moment where I started to gain access to some people I had been contacting, but they weren't just not responding because they had crazy agendas. And Marta was one of them, and she sat down and she got interested in the discussion, and she gave me an interview a few days later, and that conducted to another interview because I could say yes, we discussed, I had been participating there, and then it just opened suddenly. I needed to go out from the region I was to meet people and then to go back and do some interviews. And so my period of interviewing was very short. And the most of the time I spent on was building trust, building connections, getting engaged. People saw me participating and not just observing, participating also. How you can contribute to something. Most of researchers think that contribution can be things related to what they do. So writing, I did a lot of translation, summarizing, organizing, facilitating tables. I experimented on another approach, like getting more involved in logistics, because they were coming from different parts of the world to participate, and I felt like as a non-member of that movement, my contribution could be more beneficial for them if I took care of logistics with other people, and then they had space and time to share and participate between them.
So that's when you're talking about the activities that you were involved in. So being that creative tension in terms of being a researcher, but also participating in a way that makes people feel that you're invested also in what's going on around you.
And that because I have that feeling with qualitative research, you ask a lot from your participants. In terms of time, in terms of sharing. They decide what they share with you, but still they sit down, they take a coffee with you, they share a lot of their personal histories, and so they give a lot to you. And I feel like during the process of research, we can do more than we do actually, and also afterwards. So validating the information, getting back, publish things, or the way you share the thoughts about the research, that it's inclusive and accessible for them. So, but I also integrated that in how my participation looked like when I was doing it. So it could be very diverse.
I think it's a really great example when you were talking about, because you were talking about snowball sampling, right? And just how it happened in an unexpected way. And I think sometimes it's important to affirm for students that we can have the best laid plans, but the really great moments is when we allow ourselves to be in the moment and
Yes.
to, just in conversations or around a table, that's when you can make the connections that will lead to further good research. Great. So my second question had to do with why you chose qualitative methods, and you said a little bit about this in response to the first question, but I'd actually, I'm curious if you could say a little bit more, because you could have done something where you did mixed methods, or you could have gone community-based participatory, depending on your angles. So was there something really in particular about qualitative methods that you found would be really rich for your projects?
At the beginning, I was convinced that I needed interviews because of the type of questions I had for the comparison. So it was clear for me, because I had done previous research in the region, that women were organized, they were present, but they were not visible. So that type of observation for me confirmed that it's not true data, like going through newspapers or public discourses, or that I will get the sense of why they were not visible, or contacting like very formal and organized groups. That wasn't, I tried that. I had tried that, and I knew it wasn't the way I would find answers to my questions. So I knew I needed to interview women individually, because I had done group interviews for the master. Like you have 15 people in the room, and it's like more like a conversation. But I felt like the questions the hypothesis I had and the questions I wanted to validate with them were sensible enough politically, so that for them to feel comfortable saying something about it or decide not to respond, it will be easier to have one-on-one interviews, semi-structured, open-ended interviews. So that was the format I was convinced could be helpful for the research.
Question, essentially.
Yes. Observations became more important, as I explained earlier, when I arrived. So I realized that was necessary to get more involved, because I didn't want to be intrusive. I wanted to like respect those spaces. Like I didn't feel like I was legitimated to be always there. But then I changed my approach. I explained very transparently why I was there, and asked them if it was okay if I participated in some of the activities. And that became very useful for me to understand the dynamics. I had the idea when I arrived to Mexico to the fieldwork, to do my fieldwork, to do something more closer to collaborative methods, community and more engaged methodology. And so my goal was to find what would be the right method to do something that corresponded more to something more engaged. I tried, and it was very hard. And some groups with whom I discussed that, they were like, it's interesting, like we could have like a radio project, like talking about the movement and something that has to do with popular education. We had different ideas, but they were very honest about, we are so busy, we need, at the moment it's not the priority. So it's, for them it wasn't something that would be that much
really
benefit.
Work with,
So I realized that, and for me it was, I was sure that would be more interesting for them. And some people are doing that kind of research with them on very specific projects. And my research question was a broad question for them. And they find it important and interesting to understand why some women were able to consolidate their movement in some regions and not in others. And they were like being invisibilized, they were not at the front of what was going on, even if they were like very active participants.
Part of the movement.
So it came from them, not just from me, the idea of doing more and more traditional qualitative research, because I wanted ideally to change that to go more into something more engaged and collaborative, because also thinking of the results and how to share the results, like radio programs, videos, narratives from people who participated in the movement. But it came also from them saying, like, an interview, it's good. If you share what, like, the conclusions, it's good enough for us. That surprised me a little bit, but I understood why. They are just so busy. That I adjusted also to what the participants thought it was more useful for them.
Yeah, that's a really great insight also. You know, that sometimes, again, we come in with our own preconceived ideas of what will be the best methodology or what would be the best way to answer our questions. And then when you're in conversation or in dialogue with potential participants, if you're open to hearing their perspectives, then again, there's, I've been speaking with students about how research is something that's evolving and dynamic, right? And so I just want to highlight that the examples that you're giving are wonderful examples of how that would work as you're engaging in field work itself. So, okay, great. So the other question, and you've alluded to some of to answers to some of the other questions that I have. So if you could say really briefly what you feel are some of the advantages of qualitative research, that would be really great.
I think, like, one of the most important one is that you can go deep in the type of information you are looking for. People with interviews, with observation, people share more when they are telling you their stories, when they are sharing with you their own explanations and analysis. Qualitative methods allow that. Quantitative doesn't allow that often.
You're looking more at the big picture questions.
And they don't have that space either in questionnaires or to explain you why. So when you ask them questions about like, why did you do that or that, they don't have space to say why they did or took those decisions. I think that qualitative data allows for them to share more, to go more in deep into understanding also not just the questions the questions you are interested in, but also the whole context of the individual, but also more broadly of social dynamics, which for me are very important to understand why the individual acts
embarks on any particular decision. To me, there's a level of nuance that you can achieve in qualitative research when you're talking about depth and detail and just the richness of individual human lives. And then what that looks like when people come together in community as well. Did you have anything else that...
I think there's another thing that with qualitative methods, and some people who do quantitative methods will maybe say that also, but I feel like you have more unexpected data that pop-ups in your research. So sometimes you are convinced that the research question you wrote, like you have been thinking a lot about, it's the right question, and you go out there and with your interviews or like different methods for collecting data, and you realize more and more when you have qualitative data that maybe it's not that angle that will be interesting for your research. Maybe there's something you had missed from the literature that merits more exploration or at least just more consideration. And I think those moments happen mostly in qualitative research, but you need to be open to see them. Like if you can also do qualitative research following your questions and not opening windows. But in those moments, if they happen, sometimes lead to very, very interesting research. And you can read that from people who write about their research and take the time to share a little bit about methodology, which doesn't happen that often. It's a short amount allotted to that in books, but some of them share that, and they will often share like histories about how it came up. It wasn't what they
it was totally
they were intending to do. So I think that it happens more often in qualitative research. also, which can be good.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Sometimes
not.
it can be a struggle.
Yes, it's a struggle to stay to make sure you will finalize your project. But you can at least say that's something interesting. I'm just putting on the side, and we'll come back later on that. That's also good to do. But that will happen sometimes, and I think it's something very interesting about research.
Absolutely.
Even if it's stressful sometimes.
Do you, in terms of challenges or struggles, were there anything in particular that you would say is not large challenges, but challenges in relationship to qualitative research? We've talked about the benefits or the advantages.
Yeah, I think just to follow up on what we were discussing is things don't go as planned in qualitative research. In research in general, I think, but maybe more a little bit in qualitative. As I said before, for example, I was planning doing interviews and then observation was something that will come later. It was less important. I needed to adjust that and just change the order and give a lot of importance and time to observation participation. So things doesn't go as planned and you need to adjust, and that involves a lot of flexibility to be able to continue the research and not just stuck and panic about
or get paralyzed around.
And sometimes it involves rewriting your interview guide. Be open. So once it happened to me, I was doing individual interviews. I arrived, they invite me to a community party, and then I arrived and it was a big day of celebrations. I didn't know that, so we celebrated all day. And at the end of the day, okay, we're ready for the interview. And then I had 6 women sitting with me. And I was like, okay, how do I conduct this 6 one-on-one interview? And it turned out to be very interesting. So you need flexibility is something you need because it demands flexibility. So I think it's one of the important challenges of doing qualitative research. And I'm talking about qualitative research when you do it alone. When you do it as a group,
it's multiplied.
It's multiplied. I won't get in there, but I think 2 other maybe challenges is getting access. So if you are already involved in a group that you are, depending on your research, the topic of your research, but if it involves interviewing people that are involved in a specific group or activity, gaining access is not always that easy, especially if they don't know you, but also when they know you. It's because then you have a double role as a researcher and as a participant. And then the questions about to what extent you will share information, things like that are not easy for people. So gaining
line of
trust,
kind of a conflict of interest almost.
So I think that's a challenge. I think more and more people write about it and how to deal with that. So I think we have good material to guide ourselves in how to conduct research and taking into account again how to gain access. And the third one will be accountability. So how you follow up with people you have been who participated, how you validate the information. So, for example, you have different levels depending also on what they want. Just when you do interviews, I used to send my transcripts to them, and they were like, oh, I wish I hadn't said that. And then it's a good opportunity to take things out. And some people, I had good projects after that, and they ask your help, and then it's for you to decide to what extent you can continue, but be very respectful of them, their time. And I think accountability also comes with acknowledging that they share a lot with you. It's valuable, it's knowledge, and you will find ways to get back to them, so giving back and discussing that, because you cannot promise things you won't
be able to accomplish.
And for me that's important, because they need, we also are humans. We have also limited resources. So for me it's important to be transparent to what you can do and what you cannot do. And if you do that, they will feel like it's an honest relation because it's dynamic
Yeah.
and it's a relation.
It
so
is. Yeah, no, that's a really good point,
Yeah.
actually, that you are in relationship with your participants, and we spoke a little bit about that when we
Okay.
were in class together. But I was just curious about in terms of the validating with participants. So you mentioned you sent the transcripts and got feedback on that. Have you done any other member checks, any other strategies?
Ideally, I would have had like group validation
Okay.
by region.
Okay.
That turned out to be difficult for me because I needed to finish the PhD, and that was a point I was disappointed
Okay.
by in how I conducted my. So if I had to do it again, I will plan more time to do the validation.
Okay.
So it was the first time I doing such like a
kind of a large
a
geographical.
large geographical. So it was more complicated to organize the validation. Some of them, when I offered, and I was like, do you want me to send back also the analysis, the interpretation? They were not, no, just the transcript.
Okay.
And if you publish something like the book or just
to-
please share that with
Yeah,
us.
okay.
I was very honest from the beginning that I was writing in English.
Okay.
So my research was in Mexico, and they knew from the beginning that
Okay.
the Spanish version won't be the first one. So
Okay.
finally we published something, like not the full thesis, but something related in Spanish.
Okay.
So I feel like there's some a kind of sharing, but that's not validation. No, sharing the results, it's not validation. It's more like sharing like part of the results.
Yeah.
But the validation aspect, I think we are not sufficiently prepared in how we plan our
that's a good
research.
point.
And we need to plan more time and also think about different ways of validation because not all of participants are interested in the same way to validate the conclusions, the analysis.
That's another really, really good point.
So for them, they prefer something very individual, so they want to validate what you
Their
got
own-
from them.
their own story,
For others, is your interpretation of the question.
As a whole.
So I think it's important to take that into account.
Okay.
And I felt at the moment for that research, I didn't do my best.
Okay.
My best for that. I wasn't sufficiently prepared. But now I know more about it, which is the good thing about doing research too.
You learn and
you do things
Yeah.
differently. And if I had to do other research, like with similar methods, I will take more time for validation for sure.
Yeah. Another good point that we learn as we go, but we also learn from each experience that we have with research, and I think that's important too. Because another place where we can get paralyzed is thinking we're going to make a mistake and getting stuck on that, which I have had that experience. Okay, so I have one final question, and again, I think in our conversations you probably touched on some of these, but do you have any specific tips for students who are thinking about doing qualitative research, or another way of phrasing it is what should be foremost in their minds? So things that you mentioned were being respectful, accountability, but I don't know if you wanted to highlight a couple of other things.
I will repeat that one, flexibility. To be flexible and maybe have a good idea of different ways to get the information. So being flexible involves, okay, that's my plan, but if that doesn't work, what other things can I use for make that work? For example, getting access. For when you pass through the ethical process to approve your research, you often, if you are doing interviews, you often need to share the guide. The interview guides. You also need to share the text that you will use to contact organizations, for example, like very formal, I'm a researcher at St. Paul University, blah, blah, blah. I use those, so I send them, but the responses I had wasn't from those formal contacts. It was from different ways. But then you need to make sure that you respect the ethics and that the aspects that are involved in the way you contact people more formally are there, even if it's more informal. So flexibility, but being accountable. So making sure that you are respecting, like, the basics of doing qualitative research. So I think it will be a tip. It doesn't come doesn't often come in the way we think it
Yeah.
will come, but you need to make sure that this information is shared somehow.
Yeah.
So for consent, there are communities where written consent is something you do not do. It's not respectful of
Yeah.
the ways people ask for consent.
Yeah.
It was the case for me in my research in Mexico, but then it was oral consent.
Yeah.
So explaining I'm doing that, the same information, but different, like phrased in a verbal
Yeah.
conversation,
Yeah.
and you ask for consent. So you have different ways of doing the research,
Yeah.
but just making sure that you are respecting the culture and the traditions
The context,
and the context.
really. Yeah.
Yeah. Other things, maybe I took a few notes, but it's good always to ask. So your question was, once you have chosen qualitative methods, but
Yeah.
it's good to ask, I think, ourselves as researchers, are there things that I could have from like a more quantitative
Yeah.
or another methods? Because then you can integrate other ways of collecting data.
That's true.
Not just verbally, like some questionnaires,
Yeah.
and it's good to keep that in mind in
Yeah.
case you have trouble also getting the information you want
Yeah.
from the methods you have thought of. Gaining access as soon as possible. So we plan that. So I'm going to start my research and I'm going to contact people. And it's very important to really do that from the beginning because it takes so much time.
It does.
And I think we sometimes, we think it will go faster than it really goes.
Can assume that we'll sometimes you can have the intention of connecting with different organizations, and then once you get down to engaging with those organizations, they may decide, the research is not for them. So, having kind of the lay of the land in front of you from the very beginning, I think is important.
Yeah, it's a good point because things don't go as planned. It's like
This is the
another
of the
good
video.
example. Yeah, and I would say be prepared to get involved.
Yeah,
I think qualitative more and more asks for greater involvement and engagement from researchers.
Yeah.
I think communities are more demanding.
Yeah.
They know better how also to use research for their own benefits. So I think it's important to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
So because they also want to get something from it.
Sure.
And they are right.
Yeah, and if we're in a relationship or a partnership, it's important so that everyone feels that they're on an equal basis, and the idea that the researcher is, here, and then the participants.
That's changing. Not for everyone. Some people are very comfortable with those type of research, which is okay too. So, but be prepared to get involved. I think it's important.
Yeah.
Be transparent.
Yeah.
I mentioned that, but I think it's very important.
It's a great point.
So why you are interested, people want to know that. And often, like years before, it wasn't like you're not supposed to share your own bias, why you are interested in that research. They don't need to know. So it was that assumption that researchers did not have to share.
Yeah.
But then you have people sharing very personal things with you.
Yeah.
So I think be prepared to share things with them too, to an extent you are comfortable to, as they are. They choose what they share. But I think it's important. It's a way of like building that relationship, maintaining the idea of why you are doing that. So it's a research project. There are things you can do, you cannot do. You cannot promise things that you don't have the resources to.
Yeah, that's a good point as well.
So I think being transparent with yourself and with the participants. So I think it's important because it's frustrating sometimes when you want to do something more.
Yeah.
And then you're tempted to say, "Oh, I will try," but then.
And then you can't.
Then you cannot because then things happen like deadlines that you didn't think you needed to follow. So it shortens time for validation, as it happened to me. It shortens time for other things, and you don't want to be in that position that you have promised things and you cannot deliver.
Go back to the community or the participants.
Yeah. So I will involve all in that. But I think we did mention together a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, be flexible. It will need adjustment.
Yeah.
And also maybe something we haven't talked about, but sharing with others. So sometimes research is a very lonely thing, solitary.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we are afraid of sharing because we feel our preoccupations about our research are maybe not valid or not important, or maybe just us who are facing these challenges. Yeah. But I think often it's not the case.
That's not the case, yeah.
And sharing about it helps to find solutions, to feel also better about like it's not always easy to do research, but it's something very, very it's challenging, but it's also rewarding. Yeah. So sharing that, I think it's important. We all benefit from sharing that. So I will add that, like having group discussions for people who are in the same stage as you, like for your group, if they are doing research, like on very specific timelines, finding moments where they can share about challenges, it's very helpful. I would recommend that.
That's a really good point, because it can be very solitary, and you might feel that as you say, that the struggles that you're going through are for you alone. But most of the time, when we start having conversations, we realize that that it's part of the research process itself. So,
and those things, you don't read them in the books, right? People don't say, I have those challenges, I stressed about that.
I didn't do this.
They won't write about that. But most probably they did have challenges. We don't know which ones, and it's useful to share those even if you're not writing about them.
Yeah, that's really important. Yeah. Good. Well, thank you so much for your time. Problem. I really appreciate it. That's the end of my questions. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you guys soon. And thanks again for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you for inviting me.